Hey everyone, I'm here with Wayne, and we both work on auto evals at Arena. Wayne, could you tell us a little bit about what an auto eval even is?
Arena is really known for the LLM battles where a user can vote to anonymous models, and then those votes will be used to compute the leaderboard. But sometimes it will take time to collect enough votes to get a good reading of the model performance. Sometimes weeks. So AutoEval is an alternative way for large language model evaluation, which is much faster and more scalable. The whole idea is that based on tens of millions historical battles that have happened on Arena, we can build a LLM that can accurately predict human preference there. So specifically, in AutoEval, we would draw a sample of historical battles. We just keep one side of the battle and generate the new model's response using the same prompt. And now we use the reward model which is trained on tens of millions of historical battles to predict which side will win. So with this, we can generate a large number of synthetic battles, which can be used together with the actual battles to compute a leaderboard. That's how it works.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so it sounds like the reward model is able to give us a pretty interesting prediction of the score that we can actually use to evaluate the model. Would this be considered a static benchmark?
Arena is different from static benchmark. Our traffic is based on real-world use case. It's very dynamic, and it's able to capture new patterns, new use cases, or new tools. AutoEval is drawn from existing real battles. In that sense, it's not a static benchmark.
It sounds like the reward model is actually able to take in the human prompts and the model response and output a useful score. But how is this different than just using an LLM-as-a-judge like Gemini or Claude to decide the battles?
I think in that sense, it's like a LLM-as-a-judge, but the difference is that our goal is to maximize the accuracy of that model. So that's why we actually take an existing LLM model and fine-tune that on existing battle data. So specifically, we feed the model with the conversation, runs through the neural networks, gets out a score. And if you do that to both sides of the model, you get two scores that describes kind of the quality of the response. You convert that into a probability that gives you the probability of choosing a specific side of the model.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So in any case, we are trying to really capture the human preferences. So how are we able to do that if the human preferences are always changing as people are, trying new models and having new use cases with the models?
Yeah, Arena has lots of traffic. With that, we are able to get new tasks, new patterns, and our reward models are continuously retrained on this new data. Through that mechanism, we should be able to capture the new patterns and preferences.
Yeah, that makes sense. The reward model gets, the weights of the reward model get updated.
Yes, exactly.
So now we have an idea of what the reward model and auto eval, how they actually work, and it seems pretty useful, but who is this actually useful for?
One use case is by the labs. When the labs have a release candidate or some checkpoints, they can use AutoEval to get a quick reading of how their model will rank. Also, they can look into the battles from AutoEval to identify some insights for them to improve the models. For example, in the past, we have seen like certain models producing twice as many tokens, but still got a 50% win rate. So there's some work to do to improve the token efficiency. The labs can also look at the model performance by category. For example, they could identify certain categories with a lower winning rate. Models may be working well for coding, but not as well for creative writing, so that they can probably focus on improving that. Yeah. Other than the high-level insights, a few patterns we have seen in the past, the model may ask lots of clarifying questions, which is an indication that it probably doesn't fully understand the context or the user questions. So those are like a really good use cases for the labs to improve the models. A second use case is evaluating a new public model on day one. In the past, it has taken us generally 2 days to release the score. With AutoEval, we aim to achieve that within 1 or 2 hours. Generally, for model release on day one, there's a lot of excitement. People are looking for the score arena. With this process, we should be able to release the score much faster.
Gotcha, yeah. So really in both cases with the labs and day one AutoEval, it's really important and the speed is really important. For the labs, it's like they're iterating really fast. They're coming out with new models all the time. And then for the day one AutoEval, we want to get the score within like a few hours. So really what is happening in that first, hour or two after a new model comes out?
When new model is released, we onboard that model to Arena, and then we kick off the AutoEval process. It basically runs the inference on the historical battles. After that, we run the reward model to get the synthetic battle data, which allows us to compute the leaderboard. Once we get the score, we go through the normal publishing process and publish the AutoEval score to the main leaderboard.
Cool, yeah. So it seems like with AutoEval, we can get a really quick reading on day one, and that's actually published to the Arena leaderboards with a AutoEval tag on it. And as we get more human votes, we can then update the leaderboard with the score from the human results. So I think now we have a pretty good idea of how AutoEval is useful for the labs and also for the public leaderboard. What are the current modalities that we can do this on?
Yeah, it supports all modalities on Arena, including text, vision, image, and code. Indeed, Haoran, you have been working on Code AutoEval for a while. Could you explain to the audience how Code AutoEval works?
Yeah, sure. Code AutoEval and really all the modalities are similar in that we use the actual prompts as the data for the AutoEval. So for the Code AutoEval, we'll be using exactly the Code Arena data. And in this case, for Code Arena, we also have a harness that does essentially a agent for web dev that, our users love to use to create websites for many different use cases. So for the AutoEval, what we do is use this exact same harness and run it on the model that we want to evaluate. So we can use the human prompts and a target model that we want to evaluate and our harness to create a website that a human user might actually see on the website. And from there, we'll use the same sort of reward model to score the response and the website. For code, it's interesting because we have to think about, when a human user goes to the website and sees the resulting battle, what do they actually care about? Not only just like the responses of the model, but also the source code. Users might look a little bit at the source code, but importantly, we also want to have visual signals since a lot of users will really care about how their website looks. By incorporating all of those, we're able to get a accurate reward model that can actually predict the Code Arena leaderboard very well.
Interesting. So you mentioned the code harness. So what happens if the harness is updated?
Yeah, this is really important. If the harness is updated, then the websites that are being generated are going to be different, even if it's the same model. So in Code Arena, what we'll do is we will make sure the AutoEval is always using the latest harness. And in order to do that, we actually have to regenerate both sides of the battle. So in this case, the target model, we're always regenerating and reinferencing, but in Code Arena, we'll also regenerate the side that it's battling with the updated harness. And this is kind of going back to how we make sure the reward model and AutoEval is actually able to keep up with some of the new updates, both to the harness and how people are using the Code Arena.
That's very cool. Is this specific to Code Arena or do you regenerate for other modalities?
Yeah, for the other modalities, we don't necessarily need to do the regeneration on both sides. We'll, of course, do the regeneration and the inferencing on the target model that we want. But because of the fact that there's no sense of this like harness drift, we are able to just reuse like the actual responses from the model that our target model is battling. So we've gone over quite a few of the modalities. We've gone into a specific modality of AutoEval, and we've talked about the use cases. I think our users can go onto the Arena leaderboard and find the AutoEval tag on day 1 releases now. Wayne, you also mentioned earlier that the labs are using it. I think one of the questions floating around that's on many people's mind is this how Arena actually makes money?
Sure, yeah. Yes. Human eval is kind of the ground truth. But labs can only run probably 1 or 2 human evals per week. With auto eval, which is cheaper and faster, they can run many more every week, ranging from tens or to hundreds of auto evals per week,
Right.
so that they can get feedback much faster, get more insights. Also maybe incorporating into their kind of model release CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah, that makes sense. With like the speed of auto eval, I think it's definitely something that can be very useful. And at Arena, we are evaluating models and helping people push the frontier. So it makes a lot of sense that auto eval is part of that.